What's up, guys? It's Remove Ryan. Today we're going to be reviewing all the rares and mythics of the new set March of the Machines for Magic the Gathering. I know this is different from my usual content with like Stalker and Stalker adjacent games, but I'm a huge nerd and I love Magic, so I wanted to check out the new cards. I will be reviewing these cards in mainly the lens of Commander, as I'm not familiar with Modern or Pioneer since it's been a while since I played those formats, but let's get into it. So first is Elisnorn it's a 4 mana vigilance. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you or a permanent you control, that source's controller loses 2 life unless they pay 1, and then you can pay 2 in a white, sacrifice 3 other creatures, exile Elisnor, then return it to the battlefield, transform under its owner's control. So far the front is kind of lackluster. I mean, it's an alright card, especially for commanders since you have more opponents attacking you. But the sacrifice 3 creatures isn't great. I mean, it's still cheap, and it's 4 mana for 3/5 vigilance, which isn't terrible, but I don't think the front half is great. And then let's look at the other half. You can incubate 2 5 times and transform all incubator tokens you control, and then creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain double strike until end of turn. Destroy all other permanents except for artifacts, lands, and Phyrexians. Exile it and then return it. So it does make a massive board state because it'll make those 5 incubate tokens, but then it'll flip them into actual creatures, which will be 5 2/2s. And then on your next turn, they'll all get +1/+1 double strike, making it so you have 5 3/3 double strikers, which, I mean, it's not bad. And then destroy all of the permanents except for artifacts, lands, and Phyrexians, that's pretty good. I mean, if you can get this flipped, it's very good. Which, I mean, in Commander, it's probably not the hardest thing to get it flipped. I can see this not being great in formats like Standard, because a lot of commitment. Because they printed new cards where it's just like destroy a creature with 3 power or less, and I even did this in pre-release to my opponents. They dropped Elisnor, and I just destroy it with the destroy a creature with 3 power or less. So it's definitely good, but it's one of the cards that you need to untap with, which, I mean, it's fine, but if you can get this flipped, it's really good. So next is Jin-Gitaxias. He is 3 and 2 blue with Ward 2. He's a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, draw a card. That's already pretty good. And then 3 generic and a blue, and then you exile them, then return them to the battlefield transform, but you can only activate it as a sorcery, and if you have 7 or more cards in your hand, which, to me, it feels like it's not going to be flipping that much, but the fact that it just draws a card whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and it's not once a turn, but it does have to be 3 mana value or greater. I think it's still good, but it is going to be a commitment to get it flipped, like Elisnor, it feels like. But the backside now, draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. You have no maximum hand stuff as long as you control the Great Synthesis. Return all non-Phyrexians to their owner's hands. You may cast any number of spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. So if you actually manage to get this flipped, it is just insane, because you're going to draw cards equal to the number of cards already in your hand, and then it's just a mass bounce, which is basically a board wipe, and then you can just cast all the cards you drew for free. And it doesn't have any, yeah, I mean, if you can get to the backside and your Jin-Gitaxias survives, which it does have a very good survivability because of that Ward 2, which will make, if it's a 1 mana removal spell, it'll cost 3, which it will definitely keep them alive. I think the card's good, but it is a little tricky to flip it. So, I mean, it's pretty decent. And then Sheoldred. She is 3 and 2 black, legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. She has Menace. Whenever Sheoldred enters the battlefield, each opponent sacks a non-token creature or planeswalker. And then 4 on a black, exile her, and then return to the battlefield, transform. You can only activate it if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Now to the back. For each opponent, destroy up to 1 target creature or planeswalker the player controls. Each opponent discards 3 cards and mills 3. And then put all creature cards from graveyards under the battlefield under your control. Huh. So if you can it's not the hardest thing in the world to get 8 cards in an opponent's graveyard, especially in Commander. And especially when you're making him sack when she enters. And this is going to be played on turn 5, so likely. It just depends on what you're playing against. If they have a lot of creatures or a lot of things entering the graveyard. But if you can flip her, it's removal, and then it also targets each opponent. So it makes it better for Commander. So when this enters, each opponent would have to sack something, especially and even on her first ability. And then it mills, which also feels the blast ability, which is just a Rise out of Dark Realms. Overall, this card is, it's just like the other ones. If you can manage to flip it, it's really good. I mean, even if you don't flip it, it's not terrible. It's a 5 mana to make them sack for 4 and on a 4-5 minutes body, which isn't bad. But for Commander, you want something, I guess, more substantial, really. Because there's a lot better creatures you could play than this for, like, if you're playing a sack deck or something like that. But I mean, if you can manage to flip it, then great. It's an insane card if you can flip it. And then Ubrask. I'll just go ahead and just open it. So he is 2 and 2 red, a Phyrexian Praetor with first strike. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to target opponent, add a mana. Insane. You can pay a mana, exile Ubrask, and then return it. And you can only activate if you cast 3 or more instant or sorcery spells. Cast instant. Okay. And the Great Works deal 3 damage to target opponent and each creature they control. Create 3 treasures, and then until the end of the next turn, you may cast instant and sorcery. Until the end of turn, you may cast instant and sorcery spells from graveyard. Any graveyard. If a spell cast this way would be put in the graveyard, exile it instead. So, just that static ability is just absolutely, it's just crazy. It's just a one more mana Burgie, which, I mean, it's slightly better than Burgie, I guess. For the extra mana, you're getting a 4/4 body with first strike that also pings every time you cast an instant or sorcery. And it makes 1, and it only costs 1. And if you're playing a Spellslinger deck, it is not hard at all, especially when you're making a mana every time you cast a sorcery spell. Like, if this was your Commander, then, and you're like a red mana, like Burn Spellslinger deck, I mean, this card is just insane. Because then you just pay 1, flip it, and then deals just a board wipe. Yeah, just a board wipe for your opponents, and then you ramp, and then you just get to cast sorceries and instants from any graveyard. I think out of all the Praetors I've seen so far, this one is just the most insane. Just the fact that it does what Burgie does and pings at the same time, which this probably has some nasty infinite combos that can be done with it just as your Commander, which, I mean, the card just seems insane. Then Vorinclex, the boy. He is 3 and 2 green, a Phyrexian Praetor with Trample and Reach. Whenever Vorinclex enters the battlefield, search your library for up to 2 forest cards, reveal them, put them in your hand, then shuffle. 6 and 2 green, exile him, then return to the battlefield transformed. No other kind of cost to that. You mill 10, put up to 2 creature cards from among the milled cards on the battlefield. Distribute 7 +1/+1 counters among any target creatures you control. Until the end of turn, creatures you control gain. This creature fights target creature you don't control for 1 mana. This card seems pretty weak, to be honest. The fact that it gets you 2 forests and they don't have to be basics, which I guess is a plus, but it doesn't put them into play for 5 mana, which seems kind of meh. But I guess if you're looking for certain utility lands, which I can't really think of, like they have to be forests, so I can't really think of any super good like forest utility lands. Like you can get it if you're playing multiple colors, it gets you fixing, I guess, because you can get triomes. But other than that, it's still 8 mana, no Phyrexian in the cost, so it's 8 mana to flip. And I mean, the flip side is good if you can get to it, just like the others. Which if you're green, you're probably getting to this amount of mana, so you're probably flipping this. Which, if you flip this, it's good, but the front half does not seem very good. You can mill Yeah, I mean, mill. But there is a. If you don't mill any from the 10 cards, then you don't get any creatures back, which, if you're a big bungus creature deck, then hopefully you have just a lot of creatures to get. So, and then it grows. I mean, it's alright. It gets you some creatures, grows them, and then turns them all into removal. It's an alright card, but it's definitely not as good as like past Vorinclexes. And then we have a reprint of Monastery Mentor, which it's just a cracked card. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess, and then it has prowess itself. This card has seen lots of play in Modern and Pioneer in the past. And I mean, if this should be in Pioneer now, which actually kind of makes me want to brew in Pioneer, because Monastery Mentor is just a sick card. Doesn't see as much play as Commander, but I mean, if you're Spellslinger deck in white, then you probably want it. It's a good card. Next is Zephyr Singer. It is a 2 and 2 blue Siren Pirate with Convoke. It has Flying Vigilance. Whenever Zephyr Singer enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on each creature that convoked it. I like this card. It seems good. If you're playing pirate, it's a definite really good pirate. If you're playing like Admiral Beckett Brass or something like that, it's still, if you're playing like a blue flyer deck, or just you want to give your creatures some way to not get blocked, it seems pretty good. Just any creature that convoked it get flying, and this could end up probably being like a 2 mana 3/4 with Flying Vigilance that also gives your other creatures flying. Seems pretty good. Next is the Invasion of Innistrad. Go ahead and bring this up over there, because these are dual-sided. When Invasion of Innistrad enters the battlefield, target creature opponent controls gets 13, -13, -13. It's 2 and a black. Has 5 loyalty on the battle. Now on the flip side, when it turns into an enchantment, and then when Delusion of the Dead enters the battlefield, create 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and then you can pay 3 exile target card from graveyard if it's a creature card. Create a 2/2 black zombie. It's alright. It's a 4 mana instant speed removal spell that it does get around indestructible, which definitely gives it a bump up. I can see people playing it if you're playing zombies, because it flips to a good, like a decent zombie kind of tribal card in the back, which helps you get zombie tokens, which zombies like to sack shit. So it seems decent. It's a little overcosted for removal, but it definitely, if it does target something, it is more than likely going to kill it, because not many things get that big. Overall, I'd say it's pretty mid card, pretty mid removal. Then Invasion of Tarkir. It is a single generic and a red. When Invasion of Tarkir enters the battlefield, reveal any number of dragon cards from your hand. When you do, Invasion of Tarkir deals X plus 2 damage to any other target, where X is the number of cards revealed this way. Dragon Tribal, this is insane. You reveal as many dragons as you want. Could be like a 2 mana deal 5 or 2 mana deal 6. Even 2 mana deal 3 isn't bad. It's still just like a lightning helix or something like that. And then it flips into a dragon with flying trample 4/4. Whenever dragon you control attacks, it deals 2 damage to any target, which is also just insane. Because if you have if you're dragon tribal and you're attacking, it triggers on each dragon that attacks. You'd say you attack with like 2 dragons, that's still 4 damage to any target, which is actually crazy. So, Dragon Tribal, I think this card is actually insane. And then, Invasion of whatever the fuck, Chandelar. When it's 3 generic and 2 green. Whenever Invasion of Chandelar enters the battlefield, return up to 3 target permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a permanent card from your hand on the battlefield. So, the front half isn't very impressive. For 5 mana, getting 3 permanents back to your from your graveyard to your hand. I mean, it's a good effect, but it's overcosted, and it's like not very impactful. I guess you can get back some power cards And it is only up to 3, so you could just play this and get like 1 or 2. And for loyalty, it's pretty easy to get down. But the other side is actually crazy, which I've kind of noticed with these. The front side is kind of lackluster, and then once you get to the back side, you start to get the crazy effects. So I think just putting a permanent from your hand on the battlefield at the end of each upkeep is just crazy, especially after you add 1 to 3 of them back from your graveyard. I think if you can play this and then flip it, then it's insane. But overall, it's probably mid, because you're not going to be guaranteed to flip these, because it says your opponents can also attack them. But I mean, you could probably like you could deal with people, make some deals to like they attack it and kill it. But I don't know. I wouldn't really see other players attacking this often. You probably usually have to kill these yourself. Next is Archangel Elspeth. She's 2 generic and 2 white for a legendary planeswalker, Elspeth. You can +1 to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. You can -2 to put 2 1/1 counters on target creature. It becomes an angel in addition to its other types and gains flying. And you can -6 return all non-land permanents cards with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it starts at 4 loyalty. It's alright. If you're playing a token deck, it could be good because it makes a token, but there's so many better ways to make tokens for less mana than just making a single 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. I think you'll mainly be playing this if you're an like angel tribal, because it turns your creatures into angels, or maybe this is just a good card to play in like a white creature token deck. I mean, because it does grow your tokens and make the token, and then also return, if you can manage to get it to 6, it will return all non-land permanents from your graveyard to mana value 3 or less. But you can't always count on alting your planeswalkers, which usually won't happen. It's pretty decent. It's not the best planeswalker I've ever seen, but 4 mana, it's not terrible. It protects itself, makes a 1/1 on the plus, which is nice. But it's pretty mid, to be honest. Sea Double. It's 2 and 2 blue. It can't be copied. Choose one. If your opponent has 8 or more cards in the graveyard, you may choose both. Copy target spell. You may choose new targets, or create a token that's a copy of target creature. For 4 mana, I mean, if you're looking for like a copy deck, like I can see this being really good in Orvar style decks. Orvar the all form where you're just trying to copy shit, because the create a token that's a copy of target creature is really good with Orvar, because just targeting him will make a copy, and then this will make another copy. So if you already have a non-legendary copy, this will make additional like 2 copies, which is pretty good for 4 mana, especially in Orvar. So I could see this card having a home in Orvar. Maybe in a Spellslinger deck, but it's a little overcosted for copying a single spell. But it also does copy permanent spells on the stack, and it can be anyone. It could be any like opponent spell as well, because it just says copy target spell. It doesn't say yours specifically. I think this card is pretty good, actually. Reading it again. Seems like it'll be pretty decent. Maybe like if you're a control deck or just like a copy deck, probably be pretty good in Orvar. Overall, yeah, pretty good. And then we have Bloated Processor for 2 generic and a black. He's a Phyrexian. Sacrifice another Phyrexian, put a 1/1 counter on Bloated Processor, and then when Bloated Processor dies, incubate X for X's power. Pretty mid, I'd say. Because a lot of the times your Phyrexians will probably be big, or I don't know if there's like 1/1 Phyrexian tokens that something makes, but I mean, it's decent, I guess, because when it dies, it replaces itself because you make an incubate token, which I mean, it's decent. And if you're playing nothing but Phyrexians, it's basically just a sack outlet. But it only being able to sacrifice another Phyrexian is pretty bad. So this card is not very good, I would say. I don't really like it. Maybe if you're playing the new like Commander Phyrexian deck, it'd be good, but other than that, it doesn't seem great. Chandra's Home's Beacon. 4 mana, 4 generic with 2 red, a legendary planeswalker Chandra. Her static ability with the new planeswalkers, I guess they've been adding static abilities now. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability only triggers once each turn. You can plus to add 2 mana and any combination of colors. You can plus to exile the top 5 cards of your library until the end of turn, or until the end of your next turn. You may cast instant sorcery spells from among those exiled cards. Wow. And then she can deal, you can minus X and have her deal X damage up to each of up to 2 targets. Okay. So this card is pretty crazy, I think. Just being able to just static ability copy a spell, your first instant or sorcery spell you cast, is pretty insane. And then you can plus her to get any mana of any color. And so she just basically ramp card advantage and removal and doubling in just a single card, which exiling the top 5 cards of your library is. So I guess you can only cast instant or sorceries, but I guess you're bound to hit at least 1 or 2. And if you're playing her, you're probably built more around instant sorceries. So I think this card would be pretty insane. This card is probably good, and I'd say this card would fit in Prosper pretty easily. Because he could take advantage of her exile. The removal is good, and it can double the power spells that Prosper would want to play. So overall, I think this card is pretty good. And then a Wrenn and a Realmbreaker for a generic and 2 green. A legendary planeswalker. Static ability, lands you control have just a Chromatic Lantern, add a mana of any color. You can +1 to up to 1 target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with vigilance, hexproof, and haste until the end of the next turn. It's still a land. You can -2 mill 3 cards, put a permanent card from among the mill cards into your hand. And then you can -7. You get an emblem with you may play lands and cast permanent spells from your graveyard. And he starts at 4 loyalty. So I think he's pretty good. Especially in Commander, it's just a Chromatic Lantern that does things, but he does protect himself with a pretty nice elemental creature, but it does not untap the land, which is kind of a downside. But, I mean, if you have an untapped land already, it just makes a Vigilance Hexproof land that can still attack because it has Vigilance, which is pretty good. And then the -2 is pretty. It would be better if you could add any card from your graveyard after you milled, but it can only be from the 3 cards you milled, which definitely makes the card selection go down and makes the card worse. And the emblem is just good. If you can get to the emblem, it's just really good. So overall, I think the card might be a little overhyped because maybe people didn't read through the abilities as closely as they should have, but I think the card is still good, and it's definitely going to see play in Commander and all that, and probably Standard too. Next on to Progenitor Exarch. It's a XX and white. When it enters the battlefield, incubate 3 X times, and then you can tap to transform target incubator token you control. So if you're going all in like Phyrexian incubator tokens, I can see this being good. Like the new Phyrexian deck, Commander deck that they released, this is probably just insane in. Because comes in and you incubate probably like 3 times, and then this will just start every turn flipping one of those into 3/3s that you incubated. So I think it's pretty good. Makes it so you don't have to spend 2 mana at least. So it's pretty good in the right deck, but if it's just by itself, it's still probably decent, but it's not great. We have Chrome Host Speed Shark or Seed Shark for 2 generic and a blue. It's a Phyrexian shark with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, incubate X, where the X is that spell's mana value. And it's a 2/4. This seems pretty insane. Kind of like a Shark Typhoon kind of effect, but it's on a creature. And these don't make creature tokens. They make the incubate tokens, which are just artifacts. But I think this is, like, if you're in a Spellslinger deck, I think this card is just insane. Incubate X. Yeah. This card, I think, is just probably see a bunch of play in Standard. It just seems really good. Just making a making an incubate token every time you cast a non-creature spell that they won't die. You can kind of hold them out and save them if you think there's a board wipe coming, or if your board state's already just dominating. You don't need to flip them and they'll stay as artifacts, just like backup creatures. Which I think it's a really good card. So next is Pylon for 3 generic and a black. It is a instant with Convoke, and it has destroy target creature planeswalker, surveil 2. It's a decent removal spell. You have to have creatures to convoke it for, I feel, it to be decent. 4 mana is pretty overcosted for a removal spell, even if it does surveil 2. But I mean, if you have a couple creatures to convoke and make it like even 3 or 2 mana, I think it definitely gets a lot better. So as removal goes, it's probably good enough to see play in Commander. I can see, especially if you're a deck built around Surveil. But overall, it's not a great removal spell, but it's still good because it does hit creatures and planeswalkers. So, it's pretty mid. Then a Rampaging Raptor, 2 generic and 2 red, trample haste. You can pay 2 generic and a red. Rampaging Raptor gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And then whenever Rampaging Raptor deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls or battle that player controls. This seems, since it has trample and haste, it seems pretty good. It's like a more expensive questing beast that doesn't get vigilance, but it also has, well, I think this is just a worse questing beast, really. But it's still decent. I think it'll see play in like mono red standard. It hits battles as well, which is pretty good. So it could be good at flipping your battles. So I think the card is pretty decent in standard. Maybe sees plays in like a dinosaur deck, but I would feel like there are better dinosaurs already than this. It's kind of just a 4 mana trample haster that can deal with planeswalkers and battles, but your commander, usually there's not too many planeswalkers, and maybe there'll be more battles with all the new sets coming out, or with all of them coming out. It's to be seen, but I think the card's pretty mid. It's not great. Next is Glistening Dawn for 2 generic and 2 green. It's a sorcery. You can incubate X twice or X the number of lands you control. X twice. So you get like 2 7/7s or something. I mean, if you have a lot of lands, it could be good, but if, I guess you're making 8 of power if you just have 4 lands. If you're ramping into this, it's probably good if you're ramping lands. I mean, it's decent, but it's not great. I feel like there's better things you could play for 4 mana. Maybe more ramp or something, or just, I mean, it definitely makes a lot of power, but then you got to remember, if you pay 4 for this and you get 2 4/4 tokens, you're going to have to pay another 4 mana to flip it. So you're basically paying 8 for 2 4/4s, which is, I mean, even. So I don't think the card is very good. The only time when it really shines is probably going to be like late game when you have a lot of lands. Like if you have like 16 lands or 8 lands, then you make 2 8/8s and it's paying 8 for 16 worth of power, and that's when it starts to get good. But overall, it's kind of lackluster, I'd say. Next is Sunfall for 3 generic and 2 white. You can exile all creatures, incubate X, where X is the number of creatures exiled this way. I mean, it's just a good board wipe, I'd say. It exiles all creatures, which is a plus, and then it also makes a incubate token, which can be pretty big if it's a lot of boards, which kind of gives you follow-up with a big creature that can just swing out. I did pull this in my pre-release, which is pretty, from playing it, at least in a limited format, it seems really good. Well, usually board wipes are really good in limited, but as board wipes go, it's definitely not bad. Not better than like Farewell, but it is cheaper. But I think definitely see some play. It's not a bad board wipe, especially since it's Exile, so it'll probably have some play in Standard and all that. But overall, I think it's a good card. Next is Transcendent Message, which is X and then 4 blue. It has Convoke, and then you can just draw X cards. This card is pretty bad. There are way better cards that do the same kind of thing, like Sphinx's Revelation, and then there's a couple ones that are like 3 blue and X, or like 2 blue and X. There's just way better draw spells. The Convoke helps it a little bit, but it's just, you actually have to have the creatures, and I think it's really overcosted for what it is. Next is Hoarding Broodlord for 5 generic and 3 black. It's a dragon. It has Convoke flying. Whenever Hoarding Broodlord enters the battlefield, search your library for a card, exile it face down in the shuffle. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may play it. Spells you cast from exile have Convoke. So if you're like this is probably insane in dragons, like a lot of these new dragon cards is, because it's just a tutor, which you hopefully have a lot of dragons. You can invoke this out for like 3 mana or something. Then you just get to search for another dragon, like your big, like, Game Ender or whatever, which would also give that spell an exile Convoke, which makes it cheaper to cast. And this also, I would say, has some... It could work in Prosper as well, giving spells you cast from exile Convoke, which is actually pretty decent in Prosper. And it also is just a tutor for Prosper that puts it in exile, which will trigger him as well. So this card, I think, is pretty good. And at least the context of Commander being in Dragon Tribal and Prosper, it'll probably have other homes, just like it's just a good tutor, I'd say, pretty much, because it also kind of discounts it when it goes into exile, giving it Convoke. So overall, I think it's a pretty good spell. Next is Nahiri's Warcrafting for a generic and 2 red. Nahiri's Warcrafting deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker or battle. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the excess damage dealt this way. You may exile one of those cards, put the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. You may play the exiled card this turn. It's decent, but for dealing 5, it's pretty overcosted. 3 mana. I mean, I don't think it'll maybe see playing like Standard and all that, but not Modern and Pioneer. This could probably see playing Commander. I mean, it's not very good removal. If you're mono red, then it might be decent enough because it's removal and card advantage. I could definitely see this being played in Prosper, but besides that, it doesn't seem great. It seems alright, but not great. And then Ancient Imperiosaur. It is a 5 generic with 2 green. It's a dinosaur. It has Convoke, Trample, Ward 2, and it enters the battlefield with 2/1 counters for each creature that it convoked, which is actually insane. Excuse me. So, it having Trample and Ward 2 for protection, and then if you convoked everything for it, it would be a 20/20 with Trample, Ward 2, which is pretty good. It would just be a free 20/20 if you had 7 creatures to convoke. But even if you're just doing 1, it's decent, because that'd be just a 6 mana 8/8 Trample Ward 2, which is pretty good. And if you're convoking like 5, it's a 16/16. So overall, I think, and Dinosaurs, this card is just going to be actually crazy. And I think this card will also see playing like Standard. Maybe Pioneer if you just have like mono green go big. I think this could be really good. So overall, I think this card it's pretty good. Good dinosaur. Next is Dust Legion Duelist. He is a creature, a 1 generic and a white. And he's a vampire soldier. Vigilance, and whenever 1/1 counters are put on Dust Legion Duelist, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn. He is 2/2. Vampire Tribal, this card is pretty good because there are a lot of different vampire cards that put 1/1 counters on vampires. It does only trigger once each turn, which definitely makes it bad, but vampires usually have a low curve with low cost cards, and since this will draw you an extra card each turn whenever you put a 1/1 counter on it, and plus it has vigilance, I think this card will actually be really good in vampires. Maybe it'll be good in standard, but I'm not really sure how many cards put 1/1 counters, but it seems pretty good, to be honest. And then Fairy Mastermind. It is a 1 generic in blue with a Fairy Rogue. It has flash and flying. Whenever opponent draws a second card each turn, you draw a card, and you can pay 3 generic and a blue to make each player draw a card. If if you know you play against a lot of people who draw extra cards, then it's good. And it is only 2 mana, so it's not that huge of a commitment. If you're playing like a fairy or a rogue deck, I think you just want to include this. I mean, even not as in a fairy rogue deck, kind of like a blue, like instant, like speed deck, then this is pretty good, because I would say at least once during at least one of your opponent's turns in Commander, they're going to at least draw 2 cards. So I think this card will be drawing cards pretty often. And even if they're not, you can force it. You can force people to do it by making them draw an extra card on their turn, which, I mean, isn't great. I mean, it could be a good group hug card if that's your thing. But other than that, I think the card's decent. It might not be a Commander staple, but it's definitely good, because a lot of people do draw a lot of cards on their turn, so I can see it seeing play. Then we have Grafted Butcher. When Grafted Butcher enters the battlefield, Phyrexian you control gain menace until end of turn. Other Phyrexians you control get 1/1, and then you can pay 3 generic and a black, sack an artifact or creature, return Grafted Butcher from a graveyard to the battlefield. Huh. This, I think, is really good for just being 2 mana. The ETB isn't, like, super insane, but I mean, if you have a bunch of Phyrexians and you're trying to finish someone off, just give them menace and finish them off in Commander or something, and then plus that's a Lord on top of that. I think that's pretty good. Like a 2-mana Lord is pretty. I mean, it's pretty standard, but it's also pretty good. And then the fact that you can sack an artifact or a creature to return this to the battlefield is insane. So I think in Phyrexian Tribal with the new Phyrexian deck, like this card is insane. Because you can sack like an incubator token or like a treasure token or just like any dog shit little creature you have. So I think Grafted Butcher is definitely really good. But only, I mean, maybe it'll probably also be good in sack decks, because it's just, you can pay 4 to return it just for free sack fodder. Well, actually, but you do have to sack an artifact or creature, so it's probably actually not that great. So overall, if it's playing in Phyrexian Tribal, it's insane. Overall, I'd say it's not very good. It has a specific home that it needs to go into, really. Next is City on Fire. For 5 generic and 3 red, it has Convoke. It's an enchantment. If source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple. So I think this card is pretty good. It's a little overcosted, but Convoke helps with that. If you're like a go wide deck, like my friend plays Dragons, and this card would be good in it, just because you usually have dorks or stuff like that, or like other smaller dragons you can use to convoke this, and once you get it down, you're really dealing damage. There are cards that are less than this, but like, I think that convoke really helps. I think on average, you'll probably be casting it for around 5 or 6, more than likely, which, I mean, the other enchantments that do this same kind of thing are usually around that price, so I don't think the card is bad. I think it's pretty good if you just want redundancy with other cards that have the same effect, and if you're like mono red or something that's like red going big and hitting hard, then I think this card is going to be really good. Then you have Deeproot Wayfinder for a generic and a green. It is a Merfolk Scout. Whenever Deeproot Wayfinder deals combat damage to a player or battle, surveil 1, then you may return a land card from graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So I could see this having play in the Merfolk Modern deck, because it's a 2/3 for 2, which isn't bad, and it also, you can surveil to put a land in your graveyard, but it is only your graveyard. So if you're playing like Modern with fetches, I can see it getting lands almost every time. In Commander, it's less likely to hit lands, but if you manage to surveil one, or you had like a fetch or any land that kind of stacks itself to find another one, then I would say it's pretty decent, especially if you're more Merfolk. If you're in green, you just want to play this as a ramp. There are definitely better ramp spells you can play. Maybe if you're like a creature based green deck, then this card is probably good. But other than that, I'd say the card's good, but it also has certain homes, I'd say. And then Knight Errant of Eos for 4 generic and a white. It is a human knight with Convoke, and whenever Knight Errant of Eos enters the battlefield, look at the top 60 of your library. You'll reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X or less from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoke the Knight Errant of Eos. Put the reveal cards in your hand. I think this card is pretty good. If you're using it to just kind of comes in and you go wide kind of deck and you convoke it using at least, I'd say, 2 creatures, then it could be good, but you have to usually convoke you just look at top 6. Okay. But they do have to be mana value X or less. Okay. So looking at the top 6, if you're like a low to the ground deck, which is what you probably want to play this in, where you're convoking a lot of smaller creatures, then this just coming in as a 4/4 and then finding you 2 more creatures, I think it's pretty crazy. Like if you're a little white weenie deck in Commander, I could see this getting a lot of play in Standard or Pioneer, and Pioneer, I know if it hasn't changed, mono white humans is pretty popular, which this I think deck would just fit in perfectly because it just comes in, you convoke, it's a big 4/4 that also finds you 2 more creatures to continue on pushing for damage. So overall, I think the card is actually really good, deceptively good. And then next is Complete the Circuit for 5 generic and a blue. It's an instant with Convoke. You may cast sorcery spells this turn as though they had flash. And then whenever you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell twice. You may choose new copies. And a Spellslinger deck that wants to play in your opponent's turn, or maybe just like a control deck, I could see this being good, but if you're a control deck or a Spellslinger deck, I don't see you having too many creatures, which this is 6 mana, which if it's early on in the game or like towards the mid game, it's going to be harder to cast. Even if you had like 2 creatures, still going to be 4 mana, and then you have to actually still cast another spell after this to get the effect, but it does copy twice. So this card feels pretty mid. If you have a lot of creatures and you have some spells you want to like double, then it could be good. Like I could see this card being good in like something like Orvar, where you have like 50 fucking copies of Orvar, and then you use this to copy your next instant or sorcery, and then just it kind of just goes crazy from there. But this card doesn't seem great. It has certain homes where it could shine, but overall the card, it seems kind of mid, to be honest. Next is Archpriest of Shadows. It's 3 generic and 2 black. It is a human warlock, backup 1. Backup is when it enters the battlefield, it can put a 1/1 counter on a target creature. And then if it's another creature, it gains the following ability. It gains the abilities that this creature would have. So it would gain Death Touch, and then whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player in battle, return target creature card from graveyard to the battlefield. For 5 mana, if you're playing like a human deck, I could see this card being worth it, like a human commander deck. It is a Death Toucher, which is always scary for people, and then it also gives that to a creature that you can attack with this turn, which kind of, you play it, and then you back up onto another creature, and then it kind of turns that creature into a reanimate spell, if it deals combat damage, which people won't want to block it, but they might because it has Death Touch. But I think this card is pretty decent for humans, or any Reanimator style deck, really, because it's just reanimation on a body that can be repeated every turn if you can get in. So overall, I think this card is pretty good. Next is Bloodfeather Phoenix for a generic and a red. It has flying. Can't block, but whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell you control, or whenever an instant sorcery spell you control deals damage to an opponent or battle, you may pay a red. Excuse me. If you do, return Bloodfeather Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield, gains haste. So maybe in an Arclight Phoenix deck, for Pioneer or Modern, it could be good, but I don't see it being great in Commander. Maybe it could be good in like a mono. It could probably be good in a mono red style deck in Standard, but I don't see this card seeing much play in Commander. I mean, it could be good just as an attacker, but usually if you're a Spellslinger deck, you're doing some sort of combo and you don't really care about combat, and it can't block either, so it can't really save you. So again, in the right place, it could be good, but overall, this card doesn't seem too great. But it could probably go crazy in like a 60 card format, I would say. And then next is the Ozolith, the Shattered Spire. If one or more 1/1 counters will be put on an artifact or creature you control, that many +1/1 counters are put on it instead. You can pay a generic and a green and tap to put a 1/1 counter on target artifact or creature you control. And then it also has, you can pay 2 to cycle it. I mean, in a 1/1 counter deck, this card is insane. Like, I know there's been 1/1 counter decks in Modern, I forgot what they're called, that this card they would love. And like Attraction 1/1 counters for Commander, this card is just insane. It's just, I think it's just hardened scales with extra benefit that can also cycle if you draw on multiple of them. I think it's just an insane card. This card would probably see a lot of play in Commander. Maybe Pioneer and Standard, maybe Modern if the 1/1 counter deck is good, but overall, I think it's a pretty good card. Okay, so there were some issues with the recording, and an overlay came up. So we're on the Invasion of Theros. It's 2 generic and a white. When the Invasion of Theros enters the battlefield, search your library for an aura, god, or demigod card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. And then on the back, it's a legendary enchantment creature. It has lifelink and indestructible as long as you control at least 3 other enchantments. And whenever another enchantment hits the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. So in enchantment style decks, I think this card would be pretty good because it also finds you an aura or a god, which can be, I think you could find like the enchantment gods like Thassa and all that, which is pretty good. For 3 mana. So 3 mana tutor one of the good enchantment gods or an aura seems pretty decent. And then the back is really good for Enchantress. If you have at least 3 other enchantments, it'll be a indestructible lifelinker. And also just have an Enchantress effect where you draw a card every time an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. So I think overall this card it might not see much play in Standard and all that, but I think this card will be very good in Commander. Next is the Invasion of Segovia. It's 2 generic and a blue. When it enters, you create 2 1/1 black or 2 1/1 blue Kraken creature tokens with trample. And then non-creature spells you cast have convoke, and at the beginning of your end step, untap up to 4 target creatures. The front side of this is really bad, I would say. And then the back side, I mean, it's not terrible. Non-creature spells you cast have convoke is pretty good, and untapping 4 creatures at your end step is pretty good at defending yourself, or if you have like things that you want to untap for, like, I don't know, so you can hold up mana, like you have mana dorks, or like they have specific effects like Priest of the Forgotten Gods or something like that. So you can see it being good. It's just the front half is so bad that it might not even be worth playing this card, to be honest. And then Breach the Multiverse, which is 5 generic and 2 black. Each player mills 10 cards. For each player, choose a creature or planeswalker card in that player's graveyard. Put those cards in the battlefield under your control. Then each creature you control becomes a Phyrex in addition to its other types. So this card is pretty overcosted, I would say. Maybe it sees play in Commander, but I don't see it seeing any play anywhere else. It's still good. You still can get 4 creatures or planeswalkers. And the cards don't have to be from the cards milled, so it can just be anything from that they just had in there before. But for 7 mana, I feel like there's a lot better cards you could play, like Rise of the Dark Realms, with just this, but you get every creature. So, other than that, I think the card's just not good. Not good at all, really. And then the Invasion of Karsus. It's 2 generic and 2 red. When it enters, it deals 3 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. Then the backside is a elemental creature, a 4/4 with ward, pay 2 life. And whenever you cast a spell, Refraction Elemental deals 2 damage to each opponent. So the front side is a board wipe, Anger of the Gods for 1 extra mana that doesn't exile, but it also hits planeswalkers, which is pretty decent. And then the backside is just a Gutter Snipe with ward, pay 2 life, which won't really stop the creature from getting killed, but it's still more damage, I guess. Overall, I'd say in like a mono red deck, this card is pretty good, or just like Spellslinger decks in general. This card is probably pretty good because it's a board wipe and then flips into a Gutter Snipe. Because it'd probably be pretty easy to flip this, seeing as if you're in red, you more than likely have burn, which can target these. So overall, I'd say this card is pretty good. Then we have Invasion of Ikoria. It is when it enters the battlefield, search your library for library or graveyard for a non-human creature card with mana value X or less and put it on the battlefield. So this is just like a Green Sun Zenith, but it has 1 extra green pip on it, which, I mean, this card is not bad in the slightest. It does suck that it has to be a non-human creature, but a lot of the time that won't really matter, I'd say. And then you can get something like a dork you need, or just a giant finisher, or just any creature you need. So I'd say it does have 6 loyalty, but I think this card is good enough on the front side that you don't always need to flip it. And if you do flip it, you get a 8/8 dinosaur for each non-human creature you control. You may have that creature sign. Its combat damage though weren't blocked, so it's kind of just a big finisher, I'd say. So overall, I'd say this card is, the front side is good. And then if you manage to get to the back, then you're just winning the game. Next is the Evasion of Gabagoo. And it is a generic and a white mana. When Invasion of Gabagoo enters battlefield, look at your target opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land card from it. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may play it. A spell cast this way costs 2 more to cast. So it's like a Elite Spellbinder, but it's 1 less mana, and I believe it makes it cost 1 less, because usually it'd make it 3 more to cast. And then the backside at the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on each creature that attacked this turn, and sacrifice Light Shield Array. Creature you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So I think this card is insane. I think it's going to see a lot of play in Standard and Pioneer. Don't think it will see much play in Commander, because it is a target opponent card, which, I mean, the backside is pretty good, because the backside is also, it grows your creatures, plus gives them protection, which, I mean, if you're like a little white weenie deck or like a creature deck in Commander, I could see this getting play, but the front side is kind of lackluster for Commander. But for Standard and Pioneer, this card is just absolutely crazy. Next is the Invasion of Arcavios. It's 3 generic and 2 blue. Whenever it enters a battlefield, search your library, graveyard, and or outside the game for an instant or sorcery you own. Reveal it, put it in your hand. And then the back is an enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets. For 5 mana tutor for an instant or sorcery. I mean, it's overcosted, but it's not bad in the slightest, because it can be a combo piece or something else. But there is like a 3 mana solve the equation that already does that, or like mystical tutor. So it's definitely overcosted, but the backside is also pretty good for spell slinging, because it copies, just whenever you cast a spell, it just makes a copy, and it's not once a turn. So the front side is pretty lackluster, but the back is good, but it also does have 7 loyalty, so it's going to be hard to flip. So overall, I said this card is it's just not very good, I'd say. It's decent if you're mono blue, but not very good overall. Next is the Invasion of Fiora, if it would load. It is 4 generic and 2 black. When it enters the battlefield, choose 1 or both, destroy all legendary creatures, or destroy all non-legendary. So it's basically just a board wipe for 6, and then has 4 loyalty. Then when it flips, it is Marchesa, the Resolute Monarch. It is a legendary creature, human noble. with Menace and Death Touch. Whenever Marchesa Resolute Monarch attacks, remove all counters from up to one target permanent. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you haven't been dealt combat damage since your last turn, you draw a card and lose a life. So this is definitely a overcosted board wipe on the front, but it's still a board wipe, which isn't bad. And then if you manage to flip it, it is only 4, so if you manage to flip it, it is... Marchesa seems being able to remove all counters from up to one target permanent seems very good with battles. So you can kind of attack with her, then just instantly flip a battle if you have this flipped already, and then she can also draw a card if you haven't taken damage. So the back half, I think, is really good for battles. And the front half is kind of overcosted, but it's not bad. So overall, I think this card is pretty good. Maybe she's playing standard, maybe not. And maybe battles become really popular, it might. But who knows? I think this card will be definitely pretty good in Commander, though, if you want to play like a battle deck or something like that. Or just any kind of... Just removing all counters from up to one permanent is pretty good, because it can also just be remove all 1/1 counters from something, or remove all loyalty counters from a Planeswalker. So I think it can definitely have some pretty good effects. Next is the Invasion of Kaldheim. So, the Invasion of Kaldheim, when it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from your hand and draw that many cards until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards exiled this way. Then the back is an enchantment, Pyre of the World Tree. Discard a land card. It deals 2 damage to any target. Whenever you discard a land, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So this is really, really good card advantage for anything that's in red. Ideally, you play this in mono red, because there's probably, if you're another color, there might be better draw you can get. But for mono red, this card is just insane. And I can see this card getting played in standard and maybe even Pioneer. But I think this card's best home is going to be in Prosper, the Tomebound for Commander, because this card is just everything he would ever want. It exiles your whole hand that you can still cast until the end of your next turn. It also refills your hand with more cards after that, and then if you manage to get to the backside, it turns any land into a fresh draw. So any land you get is basically a shock and then a new draw, which is just absolutely fucking crazy for Prosper. So overall, this card is, I think, actually insane. Then we have the Invasion of Ixalan, generic and a green. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card among them, put them in your hand, put the rest in your bottom of your library. And the back is a Belligerent Regisaur. It is a dinosaur. Trample. Whenever you cast a spell, Belligerent Regisaur gains indestructible until end of turn and is a 4/3. This card is kind of hard to rate. I think it's not a bad card. It finds you a creature, and it can be just kind of something you play early on just to dig for the permanent you might want to round out your hand. And then, or like later down the line, you can kill it and then you just get a 4/3 that gets indestructible whenever you cast something. So, card isn't bad in any sense, but I don't think it's amazing. I think it's just kind of mid. It's not a bad card, but it's not a great card. But I still think it'll see some play. Maybe it'll probably see play in standard, just because like a mono green stompy kind of deck, you can easily probably get over this. And if you have like you play a 1-drop, then you play this turn 2, turn 3, you play something big, and you can probably easily get over this and kind of roll the ball from there. So I think the card's pretty mid. Next we have Heliod, the Radiant Dawn. So he is 2 generic and 2 white. He is a legendary enchantment creature god. When he enters the battlefield, return target enchantment card that isn't a god from your graveyard to your hand. And then you can pay 3 generic and a Phyrexian blue mana to flip him, which will be, he is a Phyrexian god, Heliod the Warped Eclipse. You may cast spells as though they have flash. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card your opponents have drawn this turn. So, this card seems an Enchantress style things. I think this card is pretty good, because its enchantment itself returns a good get enchantment back from your graveyard that isn't a god, which isn't a lot. And then if you the flipping him is really cheap. It's only 3 mana because most of the time you're probably not going to be playing the blue for it. So you just flip him for 3. Then he turns into a pretty good piece for any kind of blue-white control thing, being a 4/6. And then during your opponent's turns, they will always draw the 1 card at the beginning of their turn at least. So all your instants and all your spells you cast will cost 1 less no matter what if it's your opponent's turn. And you may cast any spells though they had flash. So this is like, you can cast anything. You could cast a creature, and your creatures would cost 1 less during your turn since it gives spells flash. You can also cast them during your opponent's turn. So I think this card is pretty good actually. Even you might play this in blue-white control, I would say, maybe. The front side isn't very good for control, but I'd say the back side is pretty good, so maybe find a way to play some good enchantments that you can bring back with the front side of Heliod and kind of flip them into a good tool to kind of maybe like enchantment blue-white control could be something cool. So I think this card definitely has some potential. Then we have Rona, Herald of the Invasion, which she is a generic and a blue. She is a human wizard. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, untap Rona, Herald of Invasion. You can tap her to draw a card, then discard. She is a 1/3, and you can pay 5 and a black Phyrexian to transform her. And then she turns into a Phyrexian wizard, Rona, Talarian Obliterator. She's a 5/5. Whenever a source deals combat damage to Rona, Talarian Obliterator, that source's controller exiles a card from their hand at random. If it's a land card, you may put it on the battlefield in your control. Otherwise, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So it's kind of like a Phyrexian Obliterator, except when it deals combat damage, they just exile a card, and kind of the damage done doesn't matter. It's just whenever she takes damage, they exile a card at random, so it could be any spell, really. The front side is pretty good, I would say, because whenever you could tap her, draw, discard, then play legendary, untap her, draw, discard. So I think it's good, whatever it's called, I forgot the word, but it's good cycling, gets you through your deck, and then once you're ready, you flip her, and then kind of use her to finish off the game. I think overall this card is pretty good. I can see this card seeing play in Standard and Pioneer, and definitely in Commander, with Commander having a lot more legendaries than that. Like playing a Commander just untaps this and can cycle through your deck and all that. So I think overall this card is pretty good. Then we have Arya, Widow of the Realm. So she is a elf noble for 2 black and a generic. You can tap her, sacrifice another creature or artifact. Arya, Widow of the Realm, deals X damage to target opponent or battle, and you gain X life for X is sacrifice permanent mana value, and you can pay 5 generic and a red Phyrexian to transform her. And then she turns into a Phyrexian Elf Noble, a 4/4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you return up to 1 target artifact or creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. This card, it'd probably be pretty good in sack decks. Maybe I could see this starting a sack deck, or a sack deck being built around it in Standard, like a battle sack deck, because you play something or like an artifact or a creature, you sack it, and you can kind of kill the important battles you want to die to kind of really get the powerful effects of the backside, because a lot of front sides are lackluster, but then the backs are really powerful. So and you gain life, which this doesn't work well with creatures, since its tokens will have a mana value of 0, so it's not great for that. But the backside also returning a target artifact or creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. It does get exiled, but I think it'll get you extra value of like little ETB creatures you play that you sacrificed along the way, so it'll just give you extra value out of your creature. So overall, in a sack deck, I think this card could be really good. Or, I mean, I guess at least decent in sack decks. It's not the best card, but it's still pretty good. Decent. And then Atali, the Primal Conqueror. He is 5 generic and 2 red. He is a legendary creature, an Elder Dinosaur. A 7/7. He has Trample. Whenever he enters the battlefield, each player exiles a card from the top of the library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of spells from among the non-land cards exiled this way without paying the mana cost. So it's basically A 1 mana more Atali that is a 1 bigger and has trample, but it doesn't have to attack like the other Atali. It gets the effect for exiling from the top right away when it enters, so that's pretty good. And then you can pay 9 to and a green Phyrexian to transform him. And then he turns into a Phyrexian Elder Dinosaur at 11/11, trample, indestructible. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, they gain that many poison counters. So I think this is just an insane finisher. Definitely gonna see play in like some big, like black green or red green stompy decks and commander. Like if you're playing dinosaurs, you probably always run this because it's just like it just can with 11 dealing 11, it can just kill just by itself. It's basically a Blightsteel Colossus with trample as well. But I think Blightsteel is trample, but I'm not sure. But I'd say this card is pretty insane, to be honest. Be a pretty good finisher. Maybe it sees play in like Pioneer, maybe, but I can see this getting a lot of play in Commander and Standard. So overall, this card is, I'd say, really good. Next, we have Polukranos Reborn. He is 3 green. He is a legendary creature, a Hydra. He is a 4/5 with reach, and you can pay 6 and a white Phyrexian to transform him. And then he turns into a Phyrexian Hydra, a 6/6, and he has reach and lifelink. Whenever Polukranos Engine of Ruin or another non-token Hydra you control dies, create a 3/3 green and white Phyrexian Hydra creature token with reach and a 3/3 green white Phyrexian creature Hydra token with lifelink. I think the front is really, really good for like mono green stompy style decks. And I mean, even the back, just flipping it, because you can still be mono green and play this card because it's a white Phyrexian. So just being a 3 mana 4/5 is pretty good, especially for standard. And then the backside is less useful because it requires a non-token Hydra to die. So it also counts itself, which it'll turn kind of like the 1/6 Wormcoil Engine. It's kind of like that where it dies and then it splits into 2 different creatures. So I think the card's pretty good, I'd say. Definitely see play in Standard. If you're playing like Hydra Tribal, it'd be really good in Commander, or, I mean, even in Mono Green in Commander. Well, you couldn't even play in Mono Green, but like, I could definitely see it in certain decks seeing some play in Commander, but overall I'd say the card is pretty good. Next is the Guardian Girapur. It is 2 generic and a white. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target creature, or 1 other target creature or artifact you control. Return it to the battlefield and its own control at the beginning of the end step. So this is basically just a Flicker Wisp. It's a better Flicker Wisp, because Flicker Wisp is a 3/1, and this is an Angel as well, which goes into like Angel Tribal. And so 3 mana 3/3 flying, and it just kind of has the same effect as, yeah, just basically a better Flicker Wisp. Strictly better Flicker Wisp. So the card's really good. And then the next rare is Into the Fire. It is 2 generic and a red. It's a sorcery. You can choose 1. Into the Fire deals 2 damage to each creature, planeswalker in battle, or you can put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards, +1. So this card, I forgot what the card is called. There's a 3 mana card that is just like, Valakut Awakening. So it is basically either you can choose it to be a Valakut Awakening, where you just get a new grip, or it can be a smaller board wipe that deals 2 to each creature, planeswalker in battle. So it's good that it hits planeswalkers and battles. It sucks that it is a sorcery for the Valakut Awakening side of things, but I think this card is actually pretty good. Being a Valakut Awakening, especially for Standard, and I could see this like mono red and Commander, or just like any deck that's red that just needs a good draw spell just to get a new grip, or, I mean, it could be a draw spell or a board wipe, so I think this card is pretty good. And then we have Tribute to the World Tree. It is 3 green. It is an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters battlefield under your control, you draw a card. If its power is 3 or greater, otherwise put 2/1 counters on it. I think this card is insane. It's really good for mono green devotion. as it has the 3 green pips, and then whenever a creature enters your battlefield under your control, if its power is already 3 or greater, you just draw a card, and then if it's not, you just put 2 1/1 counters on it. So it having an effect for both sides of it, I think, is really valuable. And I think in just like any kind of creature deck or like standard, like you have creature like little probably like go wide green decks, I think this card is just insane on, because putting 2 1/1 counters on each creature that comes in, it's not once per turn either for either of the effects, I think is just insane. I think this card is just really good. Definitely see playing Commander and Standard, probably in Pioneer, maybe even Modern, who knows. But I think the card is really good. And then we have the Boon Bringer Valkyrie, is 3 generic, 2 white. And then it is an Angel Warrior. It is a 4/4. It has backup 1, so when it enters, it puts a target counter on a creature. And then if that's another creature and not itself, it'll gain flying, first strike, and lifelink like this card has. So it's just basically, if it chooses itself, it's a 5/5 flying, first strike, lifelink, which isn't bad. It's like the 5-mana angel that has protection from dragons and shit. And demons. I'm forgetting all these card names. But the card, it's probably pretty, if you're angels, it's probably decent. But overall, the card isn't very good, I would say. I mean, it's cool that I can give another creature a +1/+1 and then gives a flying, first strike, and lifelink for the rest of the turn. But that seems pretty mid, I would say. Yeah, overall, I'd say this card is pretty mid to bad. It's pretty mid if you're playing angels, but other than that, I'd say the card's not very good. Maybe it sees played in Standard just because it's a big flyer that has first strike and lifelink. I could see it definitely seeing play in Standard just because it's a big creature. And then Voldaren Thrillseeker is a 2 mana, 2 generic, and then 1 red. It is a vampire warrior, has backup 2. So it puts 2 1/1 counters or something, and it'll get the ability of pay 1, sack this creature, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So I think this could be pretty good if you have like a creature that you want to sack off that gets a good effect when it dies. So you play this, you give that creature 2 counters, and you can use it as a pseudo removal spell and able to sack itself to also get its abilities. So I think this card can definitely, in like sack style decks or in Commander, I'm going to play this in my my vampire deck. So I think the card's pretty good. It definitely, like it being a removal spell, it can just put the counters on itself and just be a bolt, or put a 2/1 counters on something else that you want to sack and get its effect from. So overall, I think this card is pretty good. May not see play in like Standard or 60 cards, but I could see it being good in like mono red Standard. And then we have Doomscar Krieger. It's 2 generic and 2 green. It's a Mensch Krieger, whatever the fuck that is. And it's a Kretar. Wait, oh fuck, I'm just stupid. I think that's in German. Yeah, it's just in German. Okay, I'm just stupid. It's Doomscar Warrior. Holy fuck. Creature, human warrior. It has backup 1, trample. And then whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, look at the top. Look at that many cards from the top of your library. You may reveal a creature card, land card from one of them, put it in your hand. So it's 4 mana, 4/3. Could be a 4 mana, 5/4. And then has trample, so it will be dealing combat damage a lot of the time to a player or battle. And then you look at that many cards from the damage you did. I think this card is, if you're in a creature style deck, it's pretty good because you'll be able to find creatures off when you hit or lands to ramp you into your bigger creatures. In Standard, I think this card will be pretty good, and like with all the different mono green cards they're getting, I think this card will be pretty insane. Commander, probably good in humans or warriors. Just a big boy that gets you more creatures, so it's pretty good, pretty decent. And I believe that is everything. I know there were the Universes Beyond stuff, or the Multiverse Legends, which I will do. They're all just kind of reprints. Oh wait, we still got more. We got Crux and Kronos. It is 3, and then red, white, black. It is Elder Giant Dog. It has Vigilance, Menace, Lifelink, and then when it It enters the battlefield or attacks. You may exile 5 cards from your graveyard. When you do, return a target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. For 6 mana, I mean, it's a good body for 6, and then it also, when it enters or attacks, you can exile 5 and reanimate. So I think this card, it's probably pretty good. Maybe it's probably too overcosted for Modern, but I can definitely see it being played in Commander. You could probably even play this as your Commander. It'd be pretty sick. And then, like, Standard and Pioneer. So I think this card is pretty good. And then when Borber and Fibble, whatever the fuck, and Fibblethip enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card, then you may discard any number of land cards. When you discard one or more cards this way, it deals twice damage to target creature. You can pay a generic and a blue and then put it into its owner's library from the top to 6/5, and it's cost Teamer and 2 generic. This one I don't think is... You can discard any number of land. You have to have really a good amount of lands for it to be good, because if you're discarding 1, it's only dealing 2, which, I mean, you kind of, when it enters, you draw, or when it attacks, you draw, and you may discard, so you don't have to, but you probably would want to as a removal. The card, I think, can be decent, but I don't think it's going to be great. Then we have Dahlia and the Gitrog monster. It's a generic, a white, black, and a green. It's a human frog horror. Has first strike and death touch. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control into the battlefield tapped, and when Dahlia, the Gitrog monster attack, sacrifice a creature or land, then draw a card. So I think this card is also going to be pretty good. It has good keywords. It's ramp, and it has a Thalia effect where creatures and non-basics enter a tapped on your opponent's side. And then whenever it attacks, you can sack a creature or land and then draw a card. So it's pretty good for if you're doing like landfall shenanigans with like Gitrog would usually do, or maybe you can have some sack synergies in there. As a commander, I think this card would be pretty good because stacks piece, it also draws cards, it also ramps, and it's just a good body as well with first strike and death touch, which is just pretty insane because unless the other creature has first strike, you're going to be killing it every time. So I think this card is pretty good. Maybe not good in 60 cards. Maybe it'd be good in 60 cards, but overall I think this card would be really good in Commander. You have Zurgo and Uchol. It's an orc dragon for 2 generic, a white, red, and blue. It has flying, a haste. It's a 4/4. It has hexproof as long as it enters the battlefield this turn. Whenever one or more dragons you control deal combat damage to a player or battle, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, and rest on the bottom of your library in any order. You may return one of those dragons to its owner's hand. So I think this could be pretty good. It's always going to be getting in right when it comes out because it has haste. It does get protection when it first enters, and it is whenever one or more dragons. So if you have multiple dragons hitting, it'll still only trigger once, but it's still card advantage when it hits. And then you can also bounce a dragon that you want to get another ETB from, which I think isn't terrible. And this can also bounce itself, so you can play it again and give it hexproof again, but that doesn't really seem worth. So overall, I say if you're playing dragons, it's pretty good, but other than that, might not be the best. Then you have Zeom and Dina, which is just Sultai, black, green, and blue. It's a human dryad. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, target opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2. You can sack another creature, draw a card. You may put a land card from your hand on battlefield tapped. If you control 8 or more lands, repeat this process. So I could see if you're built around this card and it's like your commander, it could pop off pretty hard. It does suck that it doesn't trigger whenever you draw a card. So this is only going to trigger on each opponent. So if you're drawing a second card on each opponent's turn, you're going to be doing 8 around. If you can trigger it each turn, it's going to be around 8 a turn cycle, but that's unlikely. So it might be like 4 or 6, probably more around 4. But then it being able to sack another creature, draw a card, and then put a land battlefield tapped. And then if you're like late game, you have 8 lands. Just kind of keep repeating it and keep going. I can see the card being pretty good, but it also has a lot of setup, and if it just dies and you're built around this, it might not do much. So I think the card will be good in Commander as a commander, but probably won't be great in other formats. We have Invasion of New Phyrexia. And then it is a blue and a white and X. When it enters the battlefield, create X 2/2 white and blue night creature tokens with vigilance. And then it flips into a Teferi Planeswalker. You can +1 to draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards unless you discard a creature. You can get an emblem with night you control, get +1/0 and have ward. Or you can -3 tap X creatures you control. When you do, shuffle target non-land permanent opponent controls mana X or less into its owner's library. And he starts with 4 loyalty. The front half could be good in token decks. I mean, it's just 2 mana to create X tokens, which is never terrible, but it's also not great. And it also, I mean, it has 6 loyalty, which if you're making at least 3, you can one-hit it. Which, I mean, this isn't the worst because you're making a lot of creatures, and those creatures have vigilance. The Planeswalker, I think on the back, if you can get to it, it's decent. The emblem is kind of, is kind of not great, but I guess you wouldn't really play this card unless you're in like, at least if you're in like Knights and Commander. Or I can see this might get played in like Standard as kind of just a way to fill up your board. But overall, I think you'd probably be plussing to draw 2, then discard unless you discard a creature, which is pretty good. And then the tap X creature, it's pseudo removal. If you really need to get something out of there, you can use the like little knights that you made to tap and then put something back. So I think this card is overall it's pretty mid, I'd say. It's not good. It's not like the most amazing card I've ever seen, but it's definitely not bad. Then we have Evasion of Gabagoo. It is Wooburg, and when it enters the battlefield, exile cards at the top of your library until you exile 2 non-land cards with mana value 4 or less. You can cast one of those 2 cards without paying, and then put one of them into your hand. So and then the back, Awaken the Maelstrom is all colors. Target player draws 2 cards. You may put an artifact card from your hand on the battlefield. Create a token copy of the permanent you control. Distribute 3/1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 creatures you control. Store target permanent. So I think this card just does so much that is just broken. Like being able, you exile, you basically cascade for 2 cards. You choose which one you want to cast for free, and then you get to put the other in your hand, which is pretty insane just for Wooburg. And then on the back, if you manage to flip it, you just draw 2. You get to put an artifact from your hand on the battlefield. Create a token copy of a permanent you control. Put 3/1 counters on creatures, and then destroy permanent opponent controls. I think it just does so much that this card is just insane. This card just seems like if you're a 5-color deck, you're playing this. It's just crazy. Maybe even sees play in like Standard or maybe like a Nib Mizzet deck in Pioneer or something. Card just seems really, really good. Next is the Invasion of Tolvada. So it's 3 generic, a white and a black. When it enters the battlefield, return target non-battle permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it sucks that it can't get battles, but it can get lands and anything else, which is pretty good. It's 5 mana to reanimate a permanent, which it's overcosted, but it's not the worst. And then the backside, creature tokens you control get +1/+0 and have lifelink, and at the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 white black spirit creature token. So I actually pulled this in my pre-release, and whenever you flip this thing, it is just backbreaking because it buffs your tokens, gives them lifelink, and then gives you a blocker at the end of each turn that's also flying. So this card is probably pretty decent in Standard. I could see having playing Commander as well. It's definitely not bad if you're like a creature deck or a creature token deck. This card is probably insane. Because that fucking enchantment that it flips into is really good, and plus it also can reanimate a good thing that you want to get back that's a non-battle. So yeah, I think this card will be pretty good in Commander. Maybe not great in like other formats, but I think this will be pretty good in Commander. And then we have the Jisa Herald of Predation. I don't know why I'm opening that one. It's 3 generic, a black and a green. At the beginning of combat in your turn, choose one. You can either incubate twice or incubate 2 twice. You make 2/2 incubate tokens, and then or you can transfer all your incubator tokens, Or Phyrexian you control, gain first strike and death touch, which is if you're all out on like a Phyrexian style, like standard, which you might be able to do, this card seems pretty good because it just makes 4/4 worth of power every turn, but you still have to transform them, which she can do herself on the next combat, or it just makes all your Phyrexians like really hard to block because of first strike and death touch. 5 mana might be a little high, but I think the card is still pretty good. Next, you have Quintorius, the Lore Master. He's 3 generic, a white and a black, or white and a red. He has Vigilance. At the beginning of your next end step, exile target non-creature, non-land card from your graveyard. Create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. And then you can pay 3 and tap, sacrifice a spirit, choose a target card, exile the Quintorius. You may cast that card this turn without paying its mana cost. If that spell will be put in the graveyard, put it into the bottom of its own library instead. Non-creature, non-land. So it's anything that is not a non-creature. You can create a 3/2, which isn't bad, and it's just at the beginning of. Sucks that it's at the beginning of your end step, so it's kind of like you play this, and then you have to have something, and then you kind of want to untap with it, so you can sack the spirit, and then, or I guess you exile the card that you want to replay. You get the spirit the next turn, you sacrifice it. If it's like your big finisher that you discarded, you can kind of cheat it out. So this could be pretty good at cheating out like big spells that you don't want to actually pay their mana cost for, but you actually have to exile it then untap. So it seems like a lot of commitment. So this card is it'd probably be cool in Commander, but other than that, I don't think it's very good. Next we have Errant and Giada, which is a generic, a white and a blue, and it is a human angel with flash flying. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast spells with flash or flying from your library. I mean, it's decent. 3 mana, just to kind of, if you're like blue-white control, I could see this card being pretty good in standard, or just like if you're any blue-white deck in Commander, blue-white angels. It could be pretty good, but other than that, it seems pretty mid. Next is Hitsutsugu and Kairi. It's 2 generic, a blue, and a black, an ogre, demon, dragon. It has flying. When it enters, draw 3, then put 2 cards from your hand. So it's Brainstorm when it enters, and then when it dies, you exile the top card of the library. So it could be cool if you're kind of like playing big instant or sorceries, or just any like instant or sorcery kind of deck, and then it's a Brainstorm when it enters. The card seems decent, but it seems pretty mid. And then Rankle and Torbrand is a generic 2 black and 2 red, a fairy dwarf, flying, first strike haste. It's a 3/4. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player or battle, choose any number. Each player creates a treasure. Each player sacrifices a creature, and if a sorcerer deals damage to a player or battle this turn, it deals that much damage +2. So it does have to get combat damage to do any of these, which, I mean, giving each player sacking a creature isn't the worst if you have sack fodder. Giving them mana with create a treasure, unless you like plan on finishing them off, isn't great. And then if a sorcerer deal damage to a battle this turn, it deals that much +2. I mean, if you want to, like, this would be after combat, so it would have to be after like a burn spell or something that does direct damage to it. So I think this card isn't great as well. So next is Kolga and Yadraro, which is 2 generic, 2 red and 2 black and 2 green. Ape, dinosaur, turtle. When it enters the battlefield, choose 1. It gains trample and haste until in turn. It fights target creature you don't control, or you can pay 2 red, green, discard it, and then destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. And then you shuffle it in your library and then draw a card. So I think the hand effect is pretty insane. It is kind of it's a double the mana of a regular Boseiju, but in standard it could either be like or Commander or any format. It could either be like a kind of hold on to it in the early game as a removal spell for artifact and enchantment that also will draw you a card and put itself back in. Or it can just be a big old bungus that comes out trample and haste, or it could be a removal spell as well. So I think this card is pretty good just because it has a lot of utility. And then next is Galta and Marvin, which is 3 and then 2 green and 2 white. It is a dinosaur vampire. Then it has trample. It's a 12/12. Whenever you attack, choose 1. Create a tapped and attacking XX green dinosaur creature token with trample, where X is the greatest power among the other attacking creatures, or create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So, and like a big, I don't think this card would be, I mean, it'd probably be playable in standard and maybe Pioneer, just like a big kind of guy that attacks and then grows your board, but it is one of the things where if you have haste, you better hope you untap with it, or just like you paid 7 mana for nothing. So don't think it will be great in that regard, but in Commander, if you're playing dinos or you're just playing like something, you just want a big guy that it makes a giant token for your token deck, or makes a bunch of tokens, I think this card would be pretty good in like Commander, but maybe not any of the 60 cards. Next is Draina and Linvala. Is a generic 2 white and a black. It is a vampire angel with flying and vigilance. The 3/4 activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated, and then it has all activated abilities of all creatures your opponents control, and you may spend mana as though any mana to activate those abilities. I think this card in Commander, if you're playing like Edgar, I'm going to play this in my Edgar deck. It seems just like an insane stacks piece just for being a vampire. It depends if the format has a lot of good like activated abilities. Like this card probably won't see much play in like Pioneer or Modern just because it's a little expensive. Maybe Pioneer, but if there are a lot of good tap abilities, I could see this card getting good in Standard, but it's hard. I don't think I didn't really see too many great tap abilities, so it might not be the best. So we have Brawl and Carry Zev, which is generic, a blue and a red. It's a human with first strike menace. It's a 2/4. Whenever you cast your first instant sorcery spell each turn, you may cast a spell with weapon mana value that shares a card type with it from your hand without paying its mana cost. If you don't, create a first mate Ragavan, a legendary 2/1 monkey pirate creature token, gains haste until the end of turn. So this could be pretty good, I could see, for spell slingers, because you cast like a 3 mana instant and it lets you cast a 2 or 1 mana instant after that, but you do have to have it like kind of cascading down. You do have to have the same type and a lesser mana cost in your hand, but it's still good because if you don't, you get to just make a 2/1 haster, which gives us basically a 3 mana 4/5 power kind of, which, I mean, this card probably isn't bad. I could see this card being pretty good in Standard, maybe Pioneer, but probably not, and it'd probably be a decent Commander, I'd say. So overall, I'd say the card is good. And then next we have Yargle and Mutani, which is a 3 generic black green for an 18/6, which, I mean, it dies to removal. I don't think the card's very good. That's all I'll say about it. It's just kind of a big boy to be big. Next is Durju and Hazoret. It's 2 generic, a red, and a white, a human god. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, it has vigilance and haste. Whenever it attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may exile a legendary creature card from among them, put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. Until the end of your next turn, you may cast a card without paying its mana costs. So if you cast this on turn 5 and you have 1 card in your hand, it gets haste, and then you attack. So it'd be good in like the new legendary tribal commander deck that they released a while back, which this card is probably insane with it, but in like 60 card, you have to be committed to playing legendary creatures in your deck for this to be good, because that's the only thing you can hit off the top. So if you're committed to legendary tribal, I think this card is very good, but other than that, it's pretty bad. And then on to Inga and Essica. It is 2 generic, a green and a blue. It is a human god, a 4/4. Creatures you control have vigilance and tap to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell, if 3 or more mana is spent from creatures, draw a card. So this is just like, I'd say this is probably a good like creature commander. Like if you want to play like a bunch of mana dorks and then just ramp out big creatures, this would also draw you cards from doing that. So I think this would be a good commander for that. The card seems pretty decent, but it also is very limited in its uses as well, because you have to have mana dorks for it to be good. So I don't really see this card being great in any 60 card, but it's pretty mid in Commander, I'd say, as well. So I'd say it's just overall a pretty not great card. But with that, we get one final dude, Omnath Loki Sabal. He is Wooburg, except for the Phyrexian Black. He's Phyrexian Elemental. If you lose unspent mana, that mana becomes black instead. Meaning for your pre-combat main phase, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card if it has 3 or more colored mana symbols and its mana cost. If you do, add 3 mana in any combination of its colors and put it in your hand. If you don't, reveal it, put it in your hand. So, no matter what, you're getting a card in your hand. If you're built around it and you have multiple colors or think this card to be insane, it's probably not doable in any 60 card format, really. But I was actually going to make this my commander for my 5-color deck just to try it. I think this card will be actually insane as a commander. Just drop it on 4, then your next turn you just like pop off really hard and maybe get up to like 7 mana, then cast a giant spell. So I think this card is pretty good for at least commander. But that is everything. Artifacts. Okay. Now we have Invasion of Ravnica. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land opponent controls. That isn't exactly 2 colors. Just that first part I think is it's overcosted for 5, but if you're a colorless deck, this is just insane removal. And then it flips into whenever you cast a spell, it's exactly 2 colors. Look at the top 6 cards of your library, you may reveal a card that's exactly 2 colors from among them, and put it in your hand, put the rest. So, the front is really good removal if you're like a mono brown commander deck. And I guess it's not terrible because it also just flips into a 5/5. But if you're mono brown, you're not going to be casting a spell with 2 colors. So I think both sides kind of conflict with each other, and I think the better side is probably the front side. So unless you're playing this just to build around like exactly 2 color like tribal deck for this backside, but you still have to flip this. So I think the front side is the best part, but since the backside is so bad, this card is probably just mid unless you're playing like a mono brown commander deck. Then we have the Sword of Once and Future. Equipped creature, it's 3 mana. Equipped creature is 2/2 and has protection from blue and black. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, surveil 2, then you may cast an instant sorcery spell with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If it would be put in a graveyard, exile, and it's 2 to equip. It's not the worst sword, but it's also not the best sword. I like how it surveils 2, so you can put a possible instant sorcery in your graveyard to cast for free, but it's only mana value 2 or less, so it'd be like recasting cantrips or like cheap removal. The card seems it'd probably be pretty good in Standard and Commander and maybe Pioneer. Maybe there's a way to break it in Modern, but requires you to actually deal combat damage and equip it in attack, which is hard to do, especially in Modern with the all the Premier removal and all that. So as swords go, this isn't the worst sword, but it's definitely just, I'd say, probably a mid sword. And then the last card, Realm Breaker, the Invasion Tree, cast, it's 3 mana, it's a legendary artifact. You can pay 2, tap it. Target opponent mills 3, put a land card from their graveyard to the battlefield, tap your control against. If it would leave, exile it, and then you can pay 10, sack it, and then search your library for any number of Praetor cards, put them on the battlefield. I mean, I think this is more of a gimmick card. In Commander, they're probably better rocks. I mean, if you're trying to mill people, I guess it's decent, and it can get great lands from whoever mills. So I guess it can be decent, but you're not guaranteed to hit a land. And then you can sack 10, and if you're playing Praetor Tribal with like every Praetor ever printed, like, my god, this card's insane. But like, more power to you if you're playing Praetor Tribal. So other than that, the card just does not seem very good. So I'd probably give it probably be mid, not very good. And then I'm not going to do these right now. They'll probably be for the uncommon part of this video because it's already been just really fucking long. So if you guys enjoy this style of video, please leave a comment or a like and tell me what you think. Thank you.